Hey everyone, our lesson today is going to be about DNA. So remember, all you need is a sheet of paper and something to write with, pen or pencil. If you have colored pencils or markers, you're welcome to use those as well, but they're not necessary. All right, so in this upper corner here, we will go ahead and write our title. Okay, and our title is DNA. So capital D, capital N, capital A. You definitely, unless you have been, living under a rock, as they say, you've definitely heard of DNA. You may or may not know its full name. DNA is just short for deoxyribonucleic acid. That's a mouthful. Let's write that down. So that's the full name of DNA. So you can kind of see where it gets its name. So deoxyribonucleic acid. Those three letters give us DNA. Well, what is DNA? All right, DNA is important because it carries the genetic code. And what is a genetic code? All right, well, this is a instruction manual, basically. Okay, so we can refer to it as an instruction manual for living things. So the DNA that you have tells all of your cells how to make all the components that make up you. Oops, living things, plural. There we go. All right, so when DNA was first shown to be the material that's passed down from parent to child, right, it's the hereditary material, people didn't know what that was for a long time. When it was first shown to be that, a lot of scientists were trying to figure out, okay, well, what does it look like? We can't see it, right? They didn't have any microscopes that were powerful enough to see it. So eventually they found, through lots of different techniques, that DNA has a certain shape. So you're going to draw sort of a squiggly line there, and then another one that sort of matches it with squiggles in the opposite direction. Okay? This is a famous shape. You've probably seen this in any, graphic depiction of DNA. And it's got some lines going across here to connect the two. And this is just a short piece, but, real DNA goes on and on and on. It's a very, very long molecule. And the shape of it is known as a double helix. You can think of a helix kind of like a spiral staircase. Okay, it goes up and up in a loop, and double helix means you've got two of those. All right, so most of our page is going to be taken up with doing a model of DNA. So we're going to start the model, and if we do it in this order, it can be a little complicated, but if we do it in this order here, it'll be a little easier. All right, so we're going to start by drawing a circle right about here, okay? And then you've got a line, and then you're going to make a pentagon shape, okay, with the pointy part of the pentagon pointing up. All right, then you'll draw another line to a circle, and a line to a pentagon. You're going to try to keep the pentagons sort of underneath each other. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's not the point. Okay, so we have this series of 3 so far. 3 sets of circles and pentagons. And we'll go ahead and do one more. Okay, so one more circle, one more pentagon. All right, so what we've just built there is similar to one of the sides of the DNA molecule. Okay, so this whole structure here would be like maybe this side right here. So there's going to be one on the other side, obviously, but we have some other things to draw in there first. All right, so attached to each of these pentagons, we're going to have some little rectangles, but there's going to be something different about them. So we start out as a rectangle, but on the end of this one, we're going to make kind of a circle, semicircle, instead of straight edge. Okay, and there's a reason for this. The next one, we're going to make a rectangle, but we're going to do a pointy edge. All right, and you might want to make them a little fatter than that. We're going to write something in them later, so if they're too small, we won't be able to do that. Let me make that a little bigger. That's better. All right, and then we'll have another type of rectangle, and this one's going to have a reverse circular edge. And then our fourth one will have a reverse pointy edge. So the pointy part's going in. And then our last one, we'll go ahead and give it another pointy edge to our rectangle. All right, so we have part of the DNA molecule diagrammed here. All right, so what we're going to do is the other side of the helix, and we're going to start with the base, that's what these things are, which we'll label in a minute, that match its opposite side. So if we had a semicircle over here, and the other side we'll have the inner circle, okay? Over here we'll have the reverse pointy shape. Here we'll have the semicircle sticking out, and then the rest of the rectangle. Here we'll have the pointy shape, and at the bottom you'll have a reverse pointy shape. All right. Connected to each of these, we're going to do another pentagon, but this time it's going to be upside down. Okay, so the pointy end is going to be pointing down. So go ahead and add your upside down pentagon to each of those those rectangles. All right, for some reason my upside down pentagons are just not the same as my right side up ones. Just do the best you can with these. There we go. All right, and then finally we're going to add the circles, so it'll look just like the other side. So we've got a line going here, circle, connected to the next pentagon, and so on. Okay, so that's great. We have this shape, and this is a model of DNA, but this doesn't do as much good unless we know what these things are. So let's make a key. All right, over on the left side here, we'll make a section, that tells us what's going on in our model. All right, so let's start with the circular thing. The circular thing, we're going to use a P to represent that, and this is called a phosphate. It's the molecule of phosphate. So let's go back to our model, and we're going to label all of the circles. I didn't mean to make the model bigger, hold on. Okay, so here's our model. We're going to label all the circles with a P. P for phosphate. Do that on both sides. There are phosphates on each side. And then if you've got some colored pencils, you can take a minute to color the phosphates. I'm going to use purple. Let's use purple. Okay. So that is totally up to you. If you don't decide to color them, you can skip this part. Okay, so our next component of this model are the pentagons that we drew. Okay, so we're going to add an S to the middle of the pentagon, and this S stands for sugar, but it's a certain kind of sugar. It's called a deoxyribose sugar. So you might be thinking, oh, okay, I've seen that somewhere else before up when we named DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. So it gets part of its name from that type of sugar that it has in it. So we're going to go ahead and label all of the sugars on our diagram with an S. Okay, and if you'd like to color them, you can use whatever color. I'm going to use yellow for this one. Okay. All right, so let's label part of this molecule. So this that we have on each side here, right here, we're going to add a little bracket down here. Oh wait, there we go. Add a little bracket down here. On both sides, this is known as the sugar phosphate backbone. The sugar phosphate backbone. Okay, so these are the sides of the DNA molecule of the double helix. Okay, so they make up, if we're comparing it to a ladder, these make up sort of like the sides of the ladder. So there's one on each end of this molecule. All right, so now it's time to talk about these rectangle things in our key. So let's start with the one that we drew first that was sort of rounded at the end. We're going to add an A for that, and this is one of 4 bases in DNA. And this one is called adenine. All right, so we go up to our model, and let's see, we had an adenine right here, and then we had one on the right side. I didn't draw mine very nicely, but we have one on the right side there. All right, and I'll color these in a minute. Let's go ahead and keep labeling. Our next rectangle we're going to label is the reverse curved one, and we're going to label that with a T. This is another base called thymine. So let's find those in our model. We have one across from the A and another one across from the A on the other side. And that's pretty important. These two, adenine and thymine, always come in pairs. They're always matched across the sides of the DNA molecule. They're always matched to each other. That's a rule known as the base pair rule. All right, so we've got 2 more bases here that we haven't identified. So let's look at those. The pointy one, the rectangle pointy, we're going to label that with a G. And this base is called guanine. All right, so go ahead and go to your model and label any of the pointy things with a G. We had 3 of them. And then this reverse pointy sort of structure here, we'll label that with a C. And this is a base known as cytosine. All right, so you label whatever's left here, reverse pointy, with a C. All right, so I'm going to take some time to sort of color code these, which you're welcome to do on your own page. Okay, so we've got the coloring done, and it's important to note, I probably should have said this earlier, that you can choose whichever colors you want. They don't have to be a certain way, and they don't have to match mine. The color kind of helps our brains distinguish between the different parts. All right, so now we have a couple more things to add. We need to label some more parts of this DNA molecule. All right, so these sets of rectangles that we drew across from each other, these are known as base pairs. and they always match together in this way. All right, but what holds them together? They're held together with what's called hydrogen bonds. So between the adenine and thymine, we'll draw 2 lines to represent these hydrogen bonds. And between the guanine and cytosine, there are actually 3. So we'll draw 3 lines to represent those bonds. So continue down the rest of your molecule, drawing in the hydrogen bonds. And these hydrogen bonds aren't really strong. They're actually pretty weak, and that's good because this DNA molecule is going to have to open up so that the cell can read the genetic code. The genetic code consists of the series of letters, the base pairs. The order that they're in is where the instructions for building a living thing, that's where that lies. We can explore that in another video. All right, another thing to note here, we're going to section off just one piece, one section here. So 1 phosphate, 1 sugar, 1 base. That set of 3 things represents 1 building block of DNA. So we're going to use a dotted or dashed line here to indicate that. And these building blocks are called nucleotides. So the DNA molecule is made of millions of nucleotides arranged in a certain order and bonded to their matching nucleotide on the other side. So we know what DNA looks like, and hopefully you understand a little bit more about the genetic code. But let's just sort of get an overview of what does that mean. So your DNA has the instructions for creating proteins. So let's say this is the nucleus, and the DNA is inside the nucleus. Okay. The DNA is going to send a message through another type of nucleic acid called RNA, which is much shorter and only has 1 strand. And that RNA is going to travel to the ribosome. So the job of the ribosome is to make proteins. So I'm going to represent the protein as sort of a blobby thing here. Okay, that's a protein. So proteins go on to have a lot of really important functions. They are structural molecules, they're part of cell membranes, they're hormones, antibodies, all kinds of important things. Let's say this protein is actually a pigment, and let's say that this is the pigment that's going to determine a trait, like your eye color. So we'll draw a little eye here. There's a lid, kind of half closed, I guess. All right. And this is the trait. Give her some lashes there. So we'll say the protein is one of the pigments that determines what color a person's eyes will be. There's actually several things that determine this, but let's say that this pigment is one of them. So this is how our DNA has a code that eventually turns into the different traits we have. All right, so now you should have a summary of what DNA is and what it looks like, some of the important features. Oh, I'm going to come back and add some arrows here for the hydrogen bonds to sort of show they are referring to those things right there. I hope you enjoyed the science sketch, and remember to keep making and keep learning. I'll see you next time.